Okay, I think I have everything set up now. Welcome, thank you for being here, and thank you to TDOS for having me. My presentation today, the Internet of Things, Opportunities and Dangers. For those of you who do not know me yet, a quick introduction. My name is Felix Stegerman. I am the Deputy Coordinator Netherlands for the Free Software Foundation Europe. Our coordinator Maurice is sitting right there, and we have a booth outside. I'm also a volunteer at Bits of Freedom's privacy cafes. There will be one later this afternoon, so for those of you who are interested in that, you can go there as well. I'll be there. This particular presentation reflects my own opinions on the subject, so just to avoid any potential confusion, this is not an official FSV presentation or anything. Well, let's start with the Internet of Things. What is the Internet of Things? Well, according to someone who can draw a lot better than I can, it looks a bit like this. Image from Wikipedia, for those who are interested. What I want to talk about today are these topics. Primarily, of course, the Internet of Things and a lot of things, subjects that it affects, like privacy, security, big data, the cloud, trust, control, freedom, free software. Because the Internet of Things is now finally just around the corner. More and more parts are starting to emerge. Computers are already almost everywhere. There's one right here, but most of you probably carry one in your pocket. And of course the cloud is nothing more than lots and lots of computers. But they're not really everywhere yet, although they are a significant part of our lives now. And the Internet of Things is going to change that, because they are not just going to be on our desks and in our pockets, but they're also going to be in the environment, on our bodies, in our bodies, so they actually are going to be everywhere. And the question is, what does that mean for us as software developers, but also, for everybody else, for us as a society? And what are those dangers and opportunities, as the title of my presentation reflects, when it comes to things like freedom, privacy, and security? So what is the Internet of Things made of? Well, I've tried to not come up with a pithy definition of what is the Internet of Things, but to provide a small list of some of the things that make up the Internet of Things, like sensors and actuators. Things like audio, video, motion sensors, GPS, molecular sensing, smart things. We already have some of those: televisions, appliances, smart watches, pacemakers, smartphones, of course, one of the most obvious smart things we already have. And of course, these things need to be connected through hubs, and a very often used hub at this time already is the smartphone. And of course, the cloud tends to connect parts of the Internet of Things. And, robots and drones are something I also consider to be part of the Internet of Things. So what can we use the Internet of Things for? What are the applications? Well, there's building and home automation, there's lighting, heating, ventilation, home security, all those kinds of things. There's wearables, Google Glass, prominent example. Medical and healthcare systems, where you can do remote health monitoring. You can have emergency notification systems. I recently read something about Google Glass being able to tell what your heartbeat is by using its accelerometer. There's transportation, so that's infrastructure, but also cars. Cars are chock full of technology nowadays, and we have self-driving cars now, and the users themselves. But it's not just cars, it's also planes, it's trains, it's also smart traffic control systems, so the entire infrastructure as well. Energy management, environmental monitoring, water quality, atmospheric conditions, soil conditions, anything like that. Obviously industrial applications as well. There's a lot of potential for the Internet of Things when it comes to agriculture, retail, supply chains, and industrial monitoring. Smart cities, where a lot of these things come together. And on a more personal level, there's also the possibility of using the Internet of Things to extend our senses, to have all these sensors used as an extension of our own senses, where you get also into the category of mixed reality, where you're blending the digital world and the real world. And of course it does provide a lot of opportunity for live logging, for storing everything you see and hear for later review. And of course a lot of these things are quite beneficial for societies, for businesses and for individuals. Now, a little picture of some of the parts of the Internet of Things that are already here. I put the smartphone in the center for a reason, because right now there's already some sensors available, and most of them connect to your smartphone, because that's the hub that connects everything. It does the processing, it connects all the different sensors, and it allows you to control them. Of course, not everything is beneficial. And that's, of course, part of the reason I'm here talking to you. So there are some criticisms, some controversies. For example, privacy, autonomy and control are significantly affected by the changes that we will see when the Internet of Things really comes into being. Security as well. Already, unfortunately, too often an afterthought in IT. Is going to be even more important now. For example, currently, especially when you look at healthcare, there are pacemakers, there are insulin pumps that are smart. They have Wi-Fi connections, which is useful because doctors can remotely monitor your condition and possibly even save your life. But these things are rarely properly secured, and the software is rarely open, free software. So you can't review the software that's keeping your heart beating, and that's a problem. But it's also things like infrastructure, traffic lights. A few weeks ago, it was shown how easy it is to hack traffic lights in America, to just take control over entire neighborhoods of traffic lights. And of course, when it comes to privacy, we already have public spaces, private spaces. We have the internet, which is privatized space, not really public, not really private. And the Internet of Things is going to make computing more interesting, but also more invasive. Because right now, when I'm online, my activity might be monitored. But when I'm offline, when I'm just sitting reading a book in my home, there's no cameras on me, no sensors. Not yet. And an important topic for me is, of course, free software and how it reflects on trust, control and freedom when it comes to the Internet of Things. Because a very important question is who controls these computers? And the right answer should be the users, but I don't think we're there yet. Of course, some of the important issues, like I said, are public safety. We need to have our infrastructure secure, human life, those medical implants and other devices that are now going to impact not just, computers on desks, are going to impact human life. And the possibility for data gathering and spying is also going to have an effect on democracy. So what we need is accountability, transparency and reviewability. And, I'm not saying that the people making these devices, the people building the Internet of Things are malicious or incompetent, but these things do need to be taken into account. You need to have systems that can withstand people making mistakes or deliberately trying to do harm. And that's the human factor, because even if your system is working perfectly, people do make mistakes, and some people do bad things. A very interesting thing that comes when you're using the Internet of Things to do live logging, whether intentionally or unintentionally, because all this sensor data is simply available, is hacking memories. Right now, what's in my head is going to stay there unless I tell you about it. But when we start to record every part of our daily lives and we store it in the cloud, other people might be literally able to hack our memories. And I think an also important part is that we're going to have machine networks that are somewhat invisible because they blend into the background. We might have 10 or 20 smart appliances in our homes, and we'd have no idea what they're up to, because my computer right now is under my control. I deliberately connect it to the internet or to other devices when I want to, when I mean to. But how do I know my coffee maker is talking to my refrigerator? Because we want these devices to be able to communicate without us having to tell them explicitly to do so. But it also means that a lot of the communication that's going to be between machines, and it's going to be invisible to us. And that is going to impact things like security and privacy. Now, a quote from the ACLU I'd like to share with you. There's simply no way to forecast how these immense powers, disproportionately accumulating in the hands of corporations seeking financial advantage and governments craving ever more control, will be used. Chances are that big data and the Internet of Things will make it harder for us to control our own lives as we grow increasingly transparent to powerful corporations and government institutions, which are themselves becoming more opaque to us. Now, we, by which I mean software developers, which, given that this is TDOS, the Technical Dutch Open Source Conference, I presume are in the room, at least some of you, are the ones building the Internet of Things. It's not other people, it's us. And the question is, who's responsible for making sure that the systems and devices that make up the Internet of Things are under the control of their users? And, should this be our responsibility? Maybe not. But de facto it is. Because a lot of people aren't thinking about this that should. So when I build something, and I don't work as a programmer, but I'm not usually concerned with whether I should or should not do something. A lot of us are usually concerned with, can we build it? Sure, we can. Or unfortunately, we can't. But, with this responsibility on our shoulders, we do need to ask ourselves more often whether we should do this, or whether perhaps we should do it this way or another way. Big data, also, an important topic, and very related to the Internet of Things, because what is the Internet of Things going to produce? Lots and lots of data. Big data, which can be used for very good things, but also very bad things. Big data allows us to monitor things, environments, and use all that information from sensors, from the Internet of Things, to predict and to analyze. It allows us to create things like smart cities, which are good things because, at least from this perspective, because they allow us to make better use of our spaces, of our resources. They allow us to make our lives better and our cities safer and more efficient. Also healthcare, analyzing big data gives us significant advantages. It allows us to predict diseases, pandemics. and of course to do a lot of things more efficiently. And of course, big data is already used in science, in business, in government, and it is used to do good. But it can also be used to track people, to predict their actions, and to control them. And one of the things that big data does to privacy is it causes us to lose practical obscurity. Because, for a lot of time, records of things that we do, that we own, that we did, were available, but they weren't easily searchable. A lot of records were on paper, or in databases that weren't connected. So a lot of things that we did that might have left some kind of paper trail weren't easily searchable for other people to draw conclusions from. But now they are becoming ever more so. Difference is also that things that used to be fleeting are now becoming permanent. When I go shopping in a supermarket, everyone can see what I'm buying, everyone around me. But that's fleeting. There's no permanent record of it. But when I shop online, that data about what I do, what I buy, when I buy it, possibly other things I've looked at, it's all stored permanently. So that's a very big difference. And I think most of you will have heard of the revelations by Edward Snowden. And, I like to think that we're on the track to fix some of those problems. But if we don't build the Internet of Things properly, we're only going to make things worse. Because there's going to be even more data to be used for good, but also to be exploited. Now, as to privacy and security when it comes to big data, some important questions are: who controls the data? Who owns the data? Who has access to the data? What's it used for? Is it used for the things that people said it was going to be used for, that people gave permission for it to be used for, or is it going to be used for other things? And I don't think we should put everything in one place, because it makes it easier to crack one system and gain access to lots of data, but it also makes it easier to connect different databases that we may not want to have connected, because the more different databases you can connect, the more you can aggregate that data and the more you know. And of course, not everything you know will be correct. Not all the inferences will be correct. So that's also a significant problem to be solved. And, the last point on the slide is welcome to the Panopticon. I don't know who knows what that is. It's actually a prison designed by, I'm sorry I forgot his name. And the idea was to have prisoners be in view, or potentially in view, 100% of the time. And that's actually the kind of society we're building right now. So, what can we do? Because, that would be useful. What can we do about security? Well, I think we need development practices that take security into account instead of provide it as an afterthought, so that we can build systems that are secure from the ground up. And I very much think that we need free software to make sure that the answer to the question that I already asked earlier, who controls our computers, and that includes the Internet of Things, even if not all of the parts will be directly recognizable as computers in the sense that we already know them, is the users. Because that's what free software is about, putting control of software in the hands of its users, not its makers or anyone else. When it comes to security, especially when we have lots of little devices everywhere that are not as easily accessible as my laptop right in front of me is things like updates. I keep my laptop up to date, but does everyone keep their router up to date? And that's a relatively easy thing to do, because, it's reasonably accessible. But all those little sensors, all those little devices, especially used for environmental monitoring, maybe they're secure when they're shipped, but what happens when security flaws are discovered? How are they patched? Or maybe we should even make them break automatically after a certain amount of time. That's not good for the environment, but it might be better for security, because we can't expect them to stay secure. And of course, these systems we're building have to be tolerant for misuse and failure, because there's always going to be humans in the loop. And a hard question is how to be sure that the system does what the user expects when it comes to security and privacy. And the system has to work in a complex environment of people, resources, and incentives. If I am able to keep my personal computer up to date, but I don't have the incentive to do so, I probably won't. So those are also parts of the system as a whole that need to be taken into account. Now, as to privacy, what I think we should do is put the users in control of their data, of their devices. And one of the interesting things I came across recently were proposals whereby, for example, users of smartphone apps that collect data that is actually useful to have for companies, for governments, don't share the raw data, but only the relevant data with explicit consent by the users. So what happens is that instead of just, sending every bit of GPS information to the app's manufacturer and having them decide what to do with the information, all of it, you already do part of the analysis on your smartphone, for example. So that you end up with something that is still useful, but it says a lot less about you. Instead of every bit of GPS data of the entire day, you only tell the company, for example, what they actually wanted to know, which is how far did you travel from home, on average, over the past year. Which is, of course, a lot less privacy invasive than sharing the raw data. Now, privacy is a very hard problem, not just for people, but especially for computers. I mean, I know personally, to a degree, my preferences when it comes to my privacy, the things I do and I do not want to share. But these things can change, and they can change depending on different contexts and on different benefits and costs related to specific instances of sharing or not sharing a particular piece of data. But for people, that's already difficult to state these preferences. But to put them in something like a machine language, so that computers can actually understand our preferences and act accordingly, is of course even more difficult. And I think an important point is that, there are laws and policies coming into being regarding privacy and security, but, not enough. And even if we had perfect legislation, perfect policies on how to build the Internet of Things, on how companies and individuals and computers had to respect privacy and security, that wouldn't be enough. We'd also need technologies to enforce these laws, because, as we all know, stealing is illegal, but we still have locks on our doors, because we all know that just because it's illegal doesn't mean it won't happen. So what we need is things like encryption, federation, decentralization, to make sure that the data that is ours stays ours and is only shared with the people we actually want to share it with, in the context we want to share it with, and not abused intentionally or otherwise. Now, one of the interesting ideas I've heard recently regarding legislation is the idea of a new deal on big data, where personal data is treated as an asset, so you actually own your data, and not just the data you generate explicitly, but everything that is about you. So you possess, literally, your own data, and you have the final say in how it's used, and whether or not other people are allowed to retain it, or what they're allowed to do with it. And there's already something called the User Data Manifesto, which is, it's not a law, it's not a policy, it's a voluntary commitment to treating user data properly. And if I'm not mistaken, OwnCloud, for example, which was part of the previous talk, already states that they comply with the User Data Manifesto. So people control their own data access, they know how it's stored, and they have the freedom to choose where it's stored, to choose their platform, to run their own service, or to switch services. Of course, there's also open data. There's already a lot of open data, and there's a lot of initiatives on doing more with open data. Data that, for example, governments collect and that they share openly so that everyone can try to make more of it. And some people have suggested that a potential way to mitigate the fact that these vast quantities of data can be abused is to make everything public. Now, I'm sure that not everyone thinks that's a great idea. It might be better than simply leaving it with big corporations and governments. But one thing I haven't really heard from other people in this context is the fact that making it public still creates an imbalance, because the data itself might be available to everyone, so everyone can use or exploit it equally. The question is, who controls the processing power? Because if I have access to vast quantities of information, but I don't have the server farms that would allow me to analyze it and actually benefit from it, I'm still at a disadvantage compared to big corporations and governments that do. Now, of course, there's more to the Internet of Things and the issues surrounding privacy and security than technology alone. We need public awareness. We need people to know the dangers and opportunities. We need people to be able to choose between products and services that do and do not respect their privacy and security. And they can't do that if they're not aware of the issue. But it also applies to ourselves. If we are not aware of the issues when we build the Internet of Things, we're not going to get it right. So we also need the mindset. We need to care about these issues, and we need to have them in our minds. We need to have them in mind. We need to have the mindset to think about these things from the start, and not just afterwards, when we've built the system. Oh, wait, did we make it secure? And we also need those policies and laws, because if privacy and security are mandated by laws and policies, it's a lot easier to get them actually implemented. And of course, in the end, we need to strike a balance. And that's one of the most difficult problems, because not everyone cares about privacy to the same degree. In different contexts, things change. And, it's difficult to achieve that kind of balance. But that doesn't mean that we can't try. And to reiterate my point about free software and open standards, one of the most important aspects for me is trust, control, and freedom. Because the Internet of Things is going to consist of lots of devices, lots of sensors. Cloud is going to connect everything. And we need free software and open standards to make sure that all these devices and software that runs on them are reviewable, and that they are in our control and not leaving us at the mercy of the people who built them and whatever they choose to do with them. And so we need to be able to have systems that we can trust, that we are in control of, and that preserve our freedom. So the Internet of Things is on its way. It's up to us to build it right and to have lots of fun along the way. And that actually concludes my presentation 10 minutes early, which I think is a new record. So we do have plenty of time for questions and answers. Anyone?